Pleasant good evening. Welcome to another edition of Swerve with me. This is a show where we have adult conversations. We talk to people who have overcome challenges. They're not afraid to show their scars or to speak their truth. And we get down to the bottom line. We talk about emotional health. We talk about mental health. We talk about spiritual health and well being. We talk about anything that's worth talking about. I'm Miranda Innes, and thank you so much for joining me this week. As you come on and tag somebody, let them know that we are on and we are ready for a very, very interesting and what I will call a provocative conversation tonight. So come on in. Good evening, Monica. It's good to have you here. Hope you had a wonderful day. Hope you had some time to spend in the presence of God, and hopefully you would have been able to learn something from the scriptures that you can take with you throughout the week as you begin to navigate again and maneuver through the coming weeks ahead. Tonight I'm talking with a millennial. That was almost a tongue twister. Talking with a millennial, a young man. I believe he's 33 years of age, but not yet at the half point in his life, because we've been promised that three score and ten, right? And so I tell people when you turn 35, you're middle aged. People don't acknowledge that, but once you're 35, that's middle aged. But talking to someone who is known to what I call disturb the status quo with his revelations, if you want to call them, with his stirring commentary via social media. And sometimes I just look at his posts and I smile because I know he's just trying to provoke conversation, and he gets people stirs up, and then he goes away off in his corner and probably leaves some people trying to figure out what just happened. But it gives me pleasure tonight too. Hi Moni, good night. Good night Estelle. Good night, night Oka. Tag somebody, let them know we're in for a very, very, very interesting conversation tonight. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this platform for the first time. Some call him apostle, some call him prophet, some call him, I said, an antagonist, a disruptor, whatever you call him at the end of this night, we will find out. I want you to help me welcome my friend, my brother, Elexio Baillou. It's good to have you here. Good evening. Welcome to Swerve.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And it's a joy. I'm interested to see how this conversation goes tonight. And yeah, I'm just excited about it. Thank you again.
Sure, my pleasure. So let's jump right in and tell us who is Alexio Blue.
I think one of the best terms to describe me, well, I'll give you two. One is that I am an enigma, and it's not by choice, but it is in essence just truly a part of who it is that I am. I am, I am, I am a paradox. Paradox. I person that loves and cares deeply about the body of Christ. But I was reflecting as I was preparing for tonight, and the term disruptor seems to be a very, very accurate term to use to describe me in this season of my life. Definitely a disruptor.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit about, I'm talking about who, but like they say, where your navel string berry in the Bahamas. For all of you, that's a terminology, my international friends, that's a terminology we use in the Bahamas. Where was your navel string buried?
Well, I was born here in Nassau, which is the capital, but I grew up on an island that's about 15 minutes away, the Bahamian Single Island of Andros. I spent the first 10 plus years of my life there with my grandmother, but by relationship, she's really my grand aunt, but I call her Mommy Doris, who loved me and raised me as a widow. And that was where I got a lot of my foundational understanding in the things of God and opportunity to grow in ministry. I loved to sing, and they knew me from playing the tambourine and wearing all of these suits. And wherever she went, I went. So the first 10 years of my life was church. Then I came to Nassau and I attended Temple Christian High School. And during my tenure at TCHS, under the guidance and governance of my mother, which was interesting, I got involved within the work of ministry through the National Student Christian Movement, Reverend Diana Francis, and through a Bethel Baptist Church, where I got to sit under the leadership of Reverend Dr. Timothy Stoll, who's went on to be with the Lord. Your amazing sister, Reverend Christina Bethel, my husband, Deacon Trevor Bethel. And during that time, that's when I began to really experience this outpouring of the presence and the power of God in my life that kind of jolted me and brought me out of my shell in ways that I did not expect. I
Okay.
was.
Okay. So before you go on, let's go back to
Mhm.
entrenched in the church because of your grandmother in ministry with her from a very, very, very early age.
Yeah.
When did you know, or when was the first time that somebody said to you, whether prophetically, whether it was your grandmother or family member, that you have something like the Lord is going to use you? How early? What's your earliest recollection of something like that happening?
Well, two things. Number one, my grandmother would host a lot of men and women of God because she was known for her hospitality and her bed and breakfast. And so these gifted people would come and stay with her, and then they would say over me that he's anointed. God is going to use him powerfully. I had no context, obviously, at between 7, 8 years old, what that meant. But I remember specifically a woman of God by the name of Prophetess Rochelle Moss Wilson came to the island of Andros, and she said very simply in the service, there was like no anointing. It was just a dry youth service. And she said, the Lord has called you, this young man, and she pointed to me and another guy. She said, God has called them both as prophets. And I said, oh, okay, well, whatever. That's what happens. That's what happened, and that was definitely an inkling, a very clear speaking of it. But also, when I would come to Nassau for Bethel Baptist Association gatherings on youth night, which was Sunday night, they would put me up. I think at least on two different occasions, they would put me up to sing, on that night, and I never could get through a song because I would weep under the power of God.
Mm.
I would just weep it under the I would weep under the power of God. And
Did you know what was happening with you?
no, I was terrified. I wasn't scared of the people. I wanted to sing, but I but I would step into atmospheres, into that space, and this thing would come on me. I would flow through me, and it was just so intense. The only thing I could do was cry. And after that, they told me the church was out because once I started crying, if I'm there up there crying, and they had to lift me off the pulpit, and the rest of the saints are in tears, and it was an intense feeling, an electric feeling that totally overwhelmed me, and those were some of the signs that yeah, this is not the normal little boy.
So, knowing that you had a prophetic word, in essence, over your life from a very young age, did you feel the pressure of trying to live up to that as a young boy, or you still were not even keen enough to understand that that would come with some pressure?
I didn't have a pressure for it. I think I was like Samuel. I just grew up in the house of the Lord. So I
Mhm.
love church. My life was church. My grandmother at that point in time, she was like 60 plus years old. And so her life, she was assistant pastor in the church. So her life was given to the gospel. So my life was given to the gospel. So prayer meetings were normal for me, all night prayer gatherings. I would sit in those things. So much so that I was and then I was drawn to deeply spiritual people. And I remembered at one point a very early story that a certain woman of God who's went on to be with the Lord, Reverend Martin, she used to have these prayer gatherings, and I wasn't even 10 years old, 9 years old yet. I would be there at the altar weeping with the rest of the adults. So I always responded differently to God as compared to everybody. I just did. I couldn't explain it. It was just my norm, and there was no pressure. I had no context for pressure because all I knew was Jesus.
How did that translate into your behavior in school? What did the fellow students think about you? Did they know there was something different about you?
I think they knew there was something different about me in another way, but but as it pertains to ministry, they just knew me as
What do
the
you
church
mean by
boy.
that? Wait a minute. You can't just say a phrase like that and skirt off it. No.
So
This is Swerve with me. We get down to the nitty gritty. So
really,
what did they knew that was different about you?
I never came across as the typical little boy. Um, I wasn't. into all the games and whatnot. They called me from I was a kid. They called me gay. They called me sissy. They called me punk. I folk my difference. My
Mhm.
difference meant that that I was now the one who was going to be ridiculed. Though as much as I deeply love Jesus, and I was just a happy-go-lucky kid, and part of the problem was that growing up under my grandmother's care, because I didn't grow up under the tenure of men, growing up in my grandmother's care, I just knew to love like her. So you have
Mhm.
a little boy who loves like his grandmother, who's kind like his grandmother. So I was weird. And so I never fitted in any way, shape, or form. And so yeah, I think so. As a kid, I probably they probably thought I was very effeminate,
Mhm.
and that set up a whole other situation in terms of how it is that people treated me, and
Bullying?
I
Did
was
you experience?
yeah,
You ex-
I was Lexi.
mhm. You
Yeah,
experienced some bullying along the way?
hmm,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
Um,
So, good night if you're just joining us. I'm talking with Elexio Baillou, who is an apostle, prophet, disruptor, as I have named him, of the status quo. So, you grew up entrenched in ministry with a call on your life that you really when was it that you knew, or you would say that you answered the call?
I was in grade 9. I
Okay.
was in grade 9. I think that was the year I reconciled myself wholly to God in ways I never expected. I can't remember the decision that I chose salvation to receive the gift, but I remember the moment. It was under the ministry of now Pastor Apostle Pastor Devin Roll and Barack. They came to my school. Power got hit the campus. We could not have class, and I was at the altar again. And I love it to this day, Minister Shanicia building, and I just wept. I legitimately just cried and cried and cried. I was a cry baby. When it got real, I just cried, and that was the moment I think within my own heart something changed um, in a way that I could not explain. But even before then, um, I just studied. I was reading Juanita Bynum and Pastor Benny Hinn, reading uh, all of this deep stuff. I would go to gatherings. My youth pastor used to fuss with me because he's like, would you go to some of these places for? I was going to prayer houses. I was going to prophetic and deliverance and tent
What
revivals
were
as
you
a kid.
searching for? What were you searching for?
I didn't. I don't think I wasn't searching for anything. I just two things have always been a part of my mind. I have never seen people in the church. I didn't see us and them. If you serve Jesus, I serve Jesus, I'm going to hang with you. And then I always had this deep love for the supernatural.
Okay.
And so I didn't have language to say that I'm pursuing this. I just know that I had an awareness and an experience, and something shifted in me, especially after this that I began to speak with tongues. That provoked something in me that made me find myself in places and in spaces that radically um, were out of my range of context and language for.
So in essence, you were searching. You just didn't know what you were searching for,
I
but
didn't
you
even know
said,
I was searching. I just knew I was
"Yeah, you."
hungry.
But you
I
were, yeah,
just, I was excited. I was
right.
excited.
Looking for a place, I guess, where you felt you would fit in, and you would know that place when you got there. You would
I,
know that place when you got there.
I saw something in people that resonated in me, and it captured my mind. When I saw people prophesy, when I saw people preach, when I saw people move in unusual ways, it captured my mind. Just quick story. Most kids played with toys and dolls. I would put dominoes up on the table, and then I would do the Benny Hinn fire
Ah, the
so that
wave.
they would all fall out.
Okay, okay.
So as a kid, fun for me
Uh-huh.
was laying folk. I was laying dolls out, and then my grand uncle who was he's dead now, but he used to drink a lot. And they told me that I would preach to him, that I would rebuke him and tell him, "You need to get saved, or you're going to hell." So I just saw great preachers and preaching, and I was compelled to preach, and I would make my grandmother go sit down and watch me preach.
Okay, okay. So let's switch gears now because we have so much to talk about. But I wanted
So,
to get into a little bit of your background, so
mhm,
foundation. Because if the foundation is not firm, we already know what's going to happen with that. So now let's switch gears. So you're coming into your own spirituality as this
mhm,
teenager, this curious seeker of knowledge, the supernatural, and you're involved in ministry, and you're being
mhm.
pruned in ministry by getting opportunities to sing, um, and to really participate in ministry. And you were affiliated with, we don't have to call ministry names and stuff as we go
I
along,
will.
so let me just
I
set
just
the.
I just call the ones that the good
Yeah, yeah.
experiences.
So I just want to
Yeah,
just lay the foundation as we move because it can get a little tight. It's
yeah.
gonna get tight. So but in your search,
Hmm.
you move into a ministry as a teenager, and you're getting opportunities. And I believe you said you hosted like your first prayer conference, was it? Where you were a
It was
teen or a young
at the age
adult
of 20.
at
I
the age of
turned
20?
21 at my first prayer my first prayer
Okay,
conference.
so let's talk about let's say between high school and 20, what was happening with young Alexio at that time?
Young Elexio was in private crisis, personal doors opening up in ministry, trying to find himself, and aligning himself, unfortunately, with good and bad preachers of the gospel. So, let's say this, we talk with Swerve. So, at that point in time, by the time I was 16, I was in deep conflict and confusion about my own sexual identity, my
Okay,
own sexuality.
sure.
So, I started looking for, as well as I deeply love the prophetic. So I started looking for spaces that dealt with the prophetic ministry, where they promised me deliverance. And so at one point, I ended up in a church where it is that they took me through public deliverance, throwing up all of that crazy stuff, to quote unquote set me free. At the same time, I was always very, very gifted, and the power of God would move through me. And so I wanted to grow. I wanted to grow very much in the prophetic expression, but that was problematic in that community.
Okay, stop
Um,
right there. Let's stick a pin in it because I want to
mhm,
go back to this deliverance.
mhm,
I'm very detail oriented. So you go up for this deliverance from this sexuality identity crisis,
mhm.
whatever you were going in at the time. What did that look like? And as a result of it, did you feel any different? Did you feel delivered? Were you delivered? What happened?
It was under a tent. Um, I remembered that they did an altar call, said that uh, if you were having what they said, like if you had wet dreams, teenagers, there's a whole dynamic said that come to deliverance, and apparently
So the
the
altar
lead.
must have been filled with teenagers.
No, I think I was one of the few that actually went.
Wow.
Because I always if I was naive, but I was always true. All truth. I have a deep core value of integrity. I went up there, and so they put me in a circle, and then I remember the woman of God took her hand, put olive oil in her hand, did this in my mouth, and started to rebuke and command the spirit of homosexuality to leave me, to command all of this, everything to come out. And I did what they told me I was with the conditioning in church, which is supposed to be going through deliverance. And I remembered I thought
And
they
what
would.
was that? Because some people may not be as churched as
Oh,
you are. So
if you
what were the steps? I
I
tell you,
told
we have
her,
adult conversations. So
listen,
what's
I'm down with it. In that At that point in time, it meant that I was supposed to um, I didn't like convulse and nothing like that. I said I felt as if that there was a voice in my head saying that I've been here for a long time and I'm not coming out. And and she said the spirit of homosexuality that came in through molestation. And actually, what did happen to me as a kid was that I had had an experience with somebody who was older, that of the
male or
sexual nature,
female? Male or female?
male, male.
Okay.
And they said that, and so she said that that was the open door. I knew all of that stuff. It isn't true, but that is what um, brought, opened this door for me. And that they said because I didn't have a dad in my life, yeah. So I
And
went
she's
through
saying
the.
all of this to you at the altar.
at the altar.
Not
They
in the
stopped
microphone,
service. Oh
whispering it
yeah,
in your ear.
of course, on the microphone. My clothes. I remember when the and I can't even remember the brand name. South Pole. My whole new wardrobe. I left that place completely disheveled, and when I got home, I felt absolutely nauseous. I felt sick.
Mm,
Not, but I thought I had been delivered.
deliver.
So, so before Andrew Caldwell, that I had
Mhm.
gone through, went through that entire same situation, and my life in ministry included from that point on through most of my 20s was about simultaneously serving God and trying to get the freedom that they told me I was supposed to have, because obviously I was demonized. I'll be on my way to hell, and that they that I would never. I'd spend the rest of my life alone and different, all of that stuff.
So you
And
were
so,
still, you love God, was serving Him, but you were still conflicted. Is that what you're saying?
not just conflicted, I was tormented.
Okay.
I was tormented because how my life, this wasn't this ain't supposed to be, I'm not this ain't supposed to be how I am. This ain't supposed to be part of my makeup. I'm fasting, I'm praying, I'm doing all of this stuff, serving faithfully in the gospel. And simultaneously, things are shifting for me in the work of ministry. And I'm still trying to navigate this quote unquote struggle thing that I'm dealing with, while it is that and so it's like having this wound that everybody looks at. So people look at you differently.
Okay.
At the same time, they could not deny that meant that the grace of God
You were
was working through
gifted.
my life. And so yeah, so at the same time I was known as this powerful anointed man. At the same time, they said I either was a sissy or a punk and all of this stuff. So I experienced the good and the bad of church culture, particularly um,
Mhm.
doing ministry. And yeah,
So you settled in a ministry during that period that you had a pastor that was obviously nurturing and gave you an opportunity to actually host a prayer conference. So let's talk
Mhm.
about where did that come. Well, it came from Holy Spirit that you, the idea that you would do this
Mhm.
prayer conference, but what was it based on, and what was the end, what was the expected end,
it was
what were you
based
going for?
it was based upon the fact that I had this burden to gather together young leaders, and I had the network to do it. I was totally terrified to do it, but I had the network to do it. So I brought them together, started hosting this gathering, and then the next year it exploded. And I didn't have a certain end in mind, but I just knew that I had this urge to bring together powerful, gifted people for God to touch them and to minister to them and for them to be strengthened. And at that point in time, I had this deep burden as it relates to prayer. So I said, okay, I call these prayer conferences, and that's where that started. And it proved to be a place where there's a lot of people connected and a lot of destiny relationships emerged out of those initiatives that I did. People met each other that would have never, probably would have never crossed paths otherwise.
Okay, so I don't know if it was it you that told me you were a part of, was it
Two
two
to eight
two two
generation.
eight?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, my friends Winslow and Diana used to
Anna
have that
Johnson. Yeah,
organization or grouping. What was that experience participating in a grouping like that for you?
it terrified me. It
Okay.
terrified me because 228 was so anti organizational church as I knew it.
Hmm.
It was the contradiction, and it went against everything that I was taught that ministry should be like. They got these radical young people to serve and love Jesus. To told us we were called, some of us call us apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. That we need to cry for revival, to fast and pray. And then it is that they didn't teach us that we need to ask anybody permission. So I didn't think to ask the permission of any senior pastor. You didn't need a covering. All of this stuff that I had been groomed in for years, and they went against that. And guess what? We saw God work in ways that was amazing.
Hmm.
It radically at that point in time it did something within our city that we and in our nation we had never seen before, and it was completely organic. So for me, that experience was it was very scary, especially at first. And it was also one of the first places and spaces I really began to function in my prophetic gifting,
Mhm.
where it is that they saw that they told me to no, you need to prophesy. No, you need to minister to people. You need to lay hands on people. You need to do the work of ministry because God has put it on the inside of you. And then they saw so accurately who I was, though I was very much easily intimidated and deeply insecure, still conflicted about myself in so many ways. They still saw God working through me, and like you could still go now on YouTube and find videos of me prophesying back in those days and ministering to people, and that made me further an enigma because I was too young to be doing this. Wasn't
And what
ordained.
age? What age did were you participating?
I was 18, 19. Between
Okay.
18 and 21. I was probably one of the youngest person on their like missions team, and but definitely probably the most outspoken one, and
No doubt.
yeah, and that the Johnsons leaned on and pushed and made function, and God would come out of me in ways that was uh, exceptional, especially that day and time.
Can you recall the first time you not prophes you prophesied and the someone came back and told you of the accuracy of your prophecy? Can you recall rather the first time something like that happened?
I can recall the first time I prophesied. Someone took me to minister to prophesy. Pastor Johnson took me to a youth retreat, and he said, "You're going to prophesy today." I said, "Excuse me." I figured I came for emotional support or to pray. He put the microphone, and I didn't know what I told them people. I don't know if it was the word of the Lord or not,
Sure.
but I do know um, what began to happen because I was prophesying for years and didn't know I was. Because, but at one point in time, because I had a mentor who was a prophet, and she would press me to prophesy, and it was totally scary. She said, "Prophet, what do you hear God saying about this? What do you hear God saying about that?" And so she started confirming, "Yeah, that's God. That's the word of the Lord." And but what happened with me was that um, eventually I couldn't sing without it being prophetic. Couldn't preach without it being prophetic. If I opened my mouth, it was either the word of the Lord or the song of the Lord. And then I started speaking to leaders. And I remember one time giving the word of the Lord to like Reverend Diana Francis, and she said, "That's God. That is God." And so then people who were older than me knew for sure that there was something awakening on the inside of me, because she told me in grade 10 when at the retreat, she said, "You will not just sing, you will preach and you will prophesy." I didn't know how or what that meant, but it just began to bubble up out of me. And because I was having dreams, I was having visions, I was tripping. I was having encounters with God that I couldn't explain, and it made me into a
Did you
different
share them
person.
with anyone though? Like at that point, did you have a quote unquote mentor
Sure.
that you could share what you were experiencing with?
I was blessed to have a number of people because I was so unusual as a young person that those who were more mature, like, okay, this is somebody we can have some interest in. And so I remember I was doing schools of the prophets. I was attending them. I'd be the youngest person in there. They'd have to drop me home because I didn't have a driver's license and the bus wasn't running any longer. And but I would be the youngest person in there, and I would have like 4 and 5 dreams a night. I mean, and then I started having encounters with demons, started having visitations, starting seeing myself.
Slow down, because I want to get into this. So, 4 and 5 dreams a night, you would remember them the
Yeah,
next day
I was told to write them
vividly?
down. I was told to write them
Oh,
down.
okay.
Yeah, because once I start, one of the things that happened is that I was taught by one of the mentors at that point in my life. When I said, he said that when you come into his class teaching on the prophetic, he says you're going to have an explosion of dreams and visions. So I had books of just dreams and things I was seeing that I couldn't understand.
Hmm.
Things that I would see, but myself that would come that I saw myself doing this, myself doing that, and I had no concept of that because I wanted to be a doctor. But but the, but I was just surrounded by this sense of God being involved, and so many prophecies. I couldn't go to a gathering and I get prophesied to. folk would always stand me up, and in the court people say, "Read your mail," and I had time after time people praying and laying hands on me, it was intense. My teen years, my late teens, early 20s, those were very very intense times, both pain as well as prophetic ministry receiving it.
So you talked about the dreams. Now tell me about some. You said you had some encounters with demons. Like what?
Oh yeah.
Just give me one.
Okay, I remember when I was in high school, I was SCM president, and we were fasting and praying, and we were breaking. There was something breaking out on our campus. We couldn't explain, and me and my assistant, we would have these tormenting dreams. I remembered on one occasion, I literally, um, I used to sleep with the night light on, with my light on. I couldn't sleep with the light off because I was terrified what was going to visit me in the middle of the night. And I remembered one time, and even in college, where when I hit the campus, and I was sleeping in the dorm, that in the middle of the night, I wake, I look, and there is this hooded figure over me with a knife to my neck,
Mm,
and I remember that I knew that for sure I didn't make that up because the next day my throat was sore, and
okay.
I had experiences when my bed would shake, and I had experiences where it is that I would see all these dark figures running around in my room. It was tough. It was tough because what happens is that typically if someone is a prophet, called by God as a prophet, their awakening to the unseen world can be very
And in that
traumatizing.
moment when you were in that moment when you were having those experiences, did you know what to do? Were you already instructed? If you have these encounters, this is how you should handle it, or how did you handle it?
I really didn't know what to do. I remember that I used to tell some of the people I considered to be prophetic people as mentors and elders in my life. I remember there was a kind man of God who was a teacher. I literally would call him in the middle of the night, and he would pray for me because I was terrified. I was terrified and I was weary. Him and his wife would pray for me and tell me to go back to sleep. And so in my teen years until I got a little bit older and learned my authority, if I watched a horror, I couldn't watch horror films. I couldn't watch stuff with vampires and different things like that because it was almost felt as if that was giving me giving permission to otherworldly
Hmm.
powers to invade my consciousness. And yeah, so I learned my authority by trial and error. And I
Okay.
think the more that I came into myself, who it is that I was, then I was then those things ceased.
Okay. So you're, you're
You're breaking up slightly.
I don't know what's going on technically, but
Okay, I'm back.
Jesus' name. So
Yes.
yeah, we're back on. So because it's about to move. So yeah, we could expect some disruption at the
Hmm.
moment. So let's switch gears now. So we know a little bit about your background, your foundation, how you came into the faith and into the prophetic ministry as it is now. And I want to talk about something that anybody who's been involved in ministry at any level has heard the phrase or the terminology church hurt. And I want to ask you, do you have a personal story of church hurt?
I have many stories not of being hurt in church, of experiencing humiliation, shame, embarrassment, um, of
At the
being
hands of a leader of a church or what?
it's always been at the hands of those in leadership. It's always been experiencing manipulation. I remember one leader stood me up and said that I had the spirit of Judas, that that I had a disloyal, uncommitted, deceptive spirit. I wasn't even 20 yet, uh,
You
but she said I
wasn't
had
20?
no. I
Wow.
was I
Okay.
was still in my late teens. I was part of the ministry. Told me I had the spirit of Judas. Um,
And
and
why? Why did that come about? Like, did you
I
do
wasn't a
something in particular?
I wasn't. I think at that point I wasn't attending church as consistently as some of the other people.
Okay.
Also, I was never one that you could rule easily, in the sense that I believe in submission, I believe in respect, but my grandmother taught me to have my own mind, and I couldn't just go with stuff because somebody else said it. And this leader has a reputation for being controlling and toxic. And
Mm.
what happens is that people who are very narcissistic, they have a capacity to recognize others who can be a threat to that type of operation or who won't bow. So they stigmatized me, told me I had demonic spirits because of that. Another time I had a leader when I
Wait, don't
left the
don't
church.
move on from that. Don't move on for that because I want to know. It's important. I take the time to stop and discuss these things because somebody may have this similar encounter in
Mhm.
the days ahead. So, at this young age, you're being told that you have the spirit of Judas, and how did that first of all make you feel, and secondly, how did you handle it?
I was confused, and that church literally I never spoke to, I don't think I spoke to the leader for years, and I still don't have anything to do with them because I remembered after they told me something like that, I was afraid to come to church. I was afraid to be there. I thought because they had a tendency and they were known for publicly rebuking anybody, any and everybody. They would make us stand for hours while they preached. You couldn't leave the church without their permission.
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait. I tell you, you can't go fast when you say these things. So you're saying they're standing up, preaching,
Yeah, hmm,
and you're expected to stand up through the entire,
absolutely.
whether it's 30 minutes, an hour,
Well, they preached at least 2.5 hours.
and you're just standing there,
The
and
whole church,
why?
the whole church had to stand while it is that they were
While
preaching.
they preach,
Yeah,
and you didn't think that was unusual at the time,
I was naive because I just like I followed because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. Because they talked about submission and
right?
about getting you free and deliverance. And you have to remember this was the space where I went to because I was crying out for the freedom that they told me. So when somebody that you believe is going to get set you free, you do it pretty much whatever they said. In fact, they told me that I should move out of my leave my mother's home, and that I should move into their trailer. One of their leaders said to me, "So it is that I could be the church more because I should forsake it all and go and sit at the apostles' feet." That's what I was told in that service in one of the
Don't you dare
services.
move. Don't say another word. Don't say another word. I gotta read some of, because this is I'm thinking this is unusual, but there are people here. Let me look at some of these
Oh
comments.
yeah.
Okay, so Monica says they were trying to control you. Jennifer says, oh, I moved too fast. Jennifer said, yes, I have experienced this as well. I don't know if she referring to the dreams or the demonic activity. Travell says, oh my God, that happened to me. I was
Hmm.
confused and almost lost my mind in torment. Patrice says, culty. Say, was that a cult? Wow, somebody said
It's
definitely a
it is
cult.
that church is known as a cult at this juncture in the city in the Bahamas.
It's known as a cult.
It's known
Wow.
it's known as a cult, but preacher pastors and preachers don't say it publicly because yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I just can't get past to just standing up, and that standing up the whole time they're preaching is to prove your loyalty, or what is that about?
It's a part of, I guess, part of discipline, part of submission.
Oh, okay.
You I remember the leader that who once got up on the pulpit and said that they cannot ordain you and set you unless it is that they have rebuked you publicly because they need to see what your spirit is like. So
Said
so
said wait, slow down. So let me repeat it to see if I understand what you said. The leader said they cannot ordain you unless they rebuke you publicly. They've
yeah,
rebuked you publicly.
part of the training program was that and I heard this because the problem is I have a really good memory. They said that before this that they said anybody as a church and as a pastor in their church of any area of ministry that they need you to sit in the front and they're gonna rebuke you, and they were known for humiliating people publicly for years because that was part of the grooming process or pretty much what we do is let's humiliate you and castigate you, so it is that you don't become puffed up in pride.
Wow. Okay. Let me get back to because these comments are coming in
I was
fast, and I want to
gaslighting.
catch them all. This is what
Mhm.
can't. I don't know what's going on. Somebody Beavers says my pastor said God showed what we was saying. God showed what we were saying. I was afraid to think or question anything. Okay, definitely spirit of manipulation and control in operation. So you experience this now. After that, I want to go back to after that initial humiliation of saying that you were Judas, whatever. Did you continue to attend that ministry because you wanted to prove your loyalty in the
I
midst of
can
being confused?
I continue to attend, and here's part of the reason why. One of my mentors, I remember, boy, two things come to mind. I remember the day I left that church, and I cried because I was so heartbroken. I didn't, because I was scared to go to church. I was legitimately afraid to go to church.
To
Um,
any church or that church in
to go to that
particular?
church, or for to go to any church, because I was afraid that the leadership was going to find out.
Oh,
Because
okay.
we were not supposed to go anywhere without their permission.
Like you can just go visit the church with your mom or your cousin
No, because you don't know
brother or somebody.
what demonic spirits are there.
Oh, okay.
And then someone I considered a mentor. I remember the day I literally went to their church on one Sunday and visited. She walked to the back and she rebuked me, um, because she told me I was being unstable for not being present in my church. I didn't have the I was not taught to confront people. Probably this is one of the reasons I'm such an antagonist now. I wasn't, by the time I was in my teens. Yeah, Monica, they broke me. I didn't have my own voice. I couldn't speak up. I couldn't do it at home because my mother terrorized me.
Mhm.
Couldn't do it at church because the church folk terrorized me. And then the person I considered a mentor and I looked up to so much, she rebuked me, and she made me sit by her in the service, and I was humiliated because she told me I was being unstable and that I need to go back and submit because, I was producing fruit and I was growing, and I just needed to basically tough it out.
Hmm. So, how long did you stay after that particular incident?
I couldn't do it any more than a year, and this is how God actually kind of
That
got me.
long? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is how God got me up there. I remembered, somebody I met, who was teaching on the prophetic. I started secretly going to their classes, and they told me, they in so many words, you need to leave, because I was their sister in the gospel, so they really wasn't going to say anything. But I followed them to to guess what, this person whose church I was there at that point in time, their spiritual fathers assembly,
Hmm.
and that was a whole other mess. But it was less traumatizing than being in this charismatic space that was filled with a lot of young people, and a lot of control and oppression, and a lot of, people who were apparently going through getting deliverance.
Okay. So that was pretty much very early in
Hmm.
ministry. You being humiliated. They call it rebuke. That was humiliation.
Hmm.
And control in like I've never heard it the actually this the second time today I heard somebody say they want you to just stand up, and that's why I asked you what did that mean for you to just be standing up the entire time they're preaching. Like how does that impact the gospel going forth
That it's not
or
about the
anything?
gospel. It's not about the gospel. Listen
Obviously
to me.
not.
This is the thing I need. I want every person to remember and hear this. The way that charismatic leaders work is that they have to control you. They have to break you down. They have to put you in places and spaces to subjugate you long enough, so it is that they can get you to do whatever it is that they want you to do. So
Mhm.
in that space, we always had a bunch of church services. In that space, they matched people to get married. In that space,
Whoa,
uh,
whoa, whoa. So they would literally say,
God said,
Alexio,
"This your
you
spouse."
they would say present the
Yeah,
person as your spouse.
yeah. This is God's to confirm it. These two are supposed to get married. A lot of those marriages didn't last, and that ministry actually had a history of people. whose spouses did. Well, they used apparently used to tell folk to leave their spouses too if they got if they had an issue with them being all the time in the ministry. So
But again,
marriages did
I'm asking this again because obviously you are at a very young and impressionable age, but
last.
at any point did, even like in your little groupings, did anybody not think this is not normal? Like
You
no one.
weren't going to say the first you if you
In
were in
your,
a space that takes all your time, your energy, and your money, you lose control of your you become subjugated. And literally the Lord had to visit me in a dream. I'll never forget it. I saw this wooden house and he pulled up underneath the floor, and all I saw was dirt and trash and garbage. And he said, "Get out." That's why I left. Because
okay.
I thought God had let me there, and I was deeply loyal to obey what I thought God was saying. Um, even because no one told me different. They told me everybody told me to submit.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, read some more comments. Travell says, yes, they do tell people who their spouses are. Yes,
Hmm.
Alexio, they have spoken over people to leave their spouses too, especially when the man
Man,
didn't want.
to tithe.
Okay. Monica says here, I still hear you. Above the subtle power of spiritual abuse is an amazing resource for anyone
Hmm.
experiences it, experiencing this. Okay, I'm I'm flabbergasted. Like I didn't know in modern day churchdom, Christendom, this
But
kind of stuff.
that's the normal thing I experienced for a long time.
That's cultism. So you were involved in multiple cults. That's what you're saying to me.
Either they're cultism or very archaic misogynistic spaces.
That's
I
more
would
than
find
misogyny. That's more than misogyny because
I'm
the
talking about other ones. Because I remember going to another ministry because I went there where it is that they everything was about another one. Everything was about deliverance and talking about other ministries, witchcraft and judgment coming upon the land. I sat in that space
Mhm.
for about a year. They apparently I was going to go through deliverance with them because one of the leaders held my hand and said he was searching me out for demonic spirits, but we never got a chance to have a session, and I ran out
wait,
of there.
wait, wait. I'm telling you, you cannot just gloss over things like that because
I'm not
it
trying to
may
gloss.
be,
It was
yeah,
so normal in my.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It may have been normal in your world, but it is not normal under any extreme in the worlds where I come from, right?
Mhm.
So that's why I want you to pause. Now, you said something about the in one ministry, somebody said they were seeking you out because, and
Searching
say
me
it
out.
slowly, searching you out.
I went to him for because I wanted deliverance. I
Okay.
wanted deliverance. The freedom out. Sorry, yes, Monica. I'm gonna slow down. The deliverance I wanted in the first church apparently didn't stick. So I went to this next church trying to find freedom, as well as it was a very it was a space that was very hyper religious, very condemning, very critical, very fearful. Still some nice things about it, and interestingly enough, it was a relief compared to where I was formerly. But I remember one of the leaders, who was the pastor of deliverance. I said, "Sir, I think I have a demonic spirit." So he grabbed my hand. He said, and then he closed his eyes. He says, "You feel anything?" I said, "No." I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm searching you out for where the demonic spirit is."
That
And
didn't
so
sound psychic to you rather than spiritual.
this is one of the things they did. I saw the one time they were doing deliverance. They literally, they all the men, several men said that we're going to combine anointing. So they touch each other on the shoulders and lay hands on the person who was apparently going through deliverance. And they said, we combine anointings and we loose 100,000 volts of the Holy Ghost against this demonic spirit and we command for it to receive pain and to torture it because they would interview demons. it was part of getting spiritual intel. So they would literally interview demons who would tell them what other
I
churches were
know that's
doing.
psychic. That's why I could call it out. And I'm saying to any of you who ever watch this, if something like that happens to you, know that that is psychic. That is not of God. Run for your life. Okay.
Yeah,
So you go to this person, and this is the encounter which you have, and you come out of that experience feeling how?
uh, which one? Because I went through about four types of deliverances. No, five, and about
Did
five
any
different
work?
courses.
Did
It
any
never
work?
worked. It never changed. I just
Okay,
made peace
so
with God and made peace with myself. I made peace with God, made peace with myself. Some will love Jesus and do the work of ministry. That's the only thing that worked. I did everything. I have sought. I read the books. I went to the. I sat under the leaders. I sat in front of the. Sat in the chair with people looking into my eyes to find demons. I had the buckets. I have had the plastic bags to
wait,
throw
wait,
up
no,
in.
stop, because I never heard but the plastic bag. What is that? What's that about?
Yeah, because when you're purging, that's what they call it, purging. That's
Oh,
when
oh, you mean so whatever you bring up? Okay,
yeah, and
whatever
you're
you
supposed to.
regurgitate.
Sometimes you're supposed to cough to
Yeah,
help bring
okay,
up
I
the
get it.
demonic spirit.
Okay,
So
uh-huh,
if you get a little bit of spirit spit, they said that's deliverance, casting demon out.
uh-huh.
I when I was in the USA, I looked for the I went to looked Excellence International, the X Gate organization. I did the what else I did? I tried to purchase or pay or book sessions with an international deliverance ministries. I did it on the phone. I did everything that people told me I was supposed to do. I mean,
To purchase. See, I'm still stuck on to purchase a deliverance session.
yeah, in NASA right now you have to pay about $1,000, I think, for certain ministry gift if you want deliverance. You pay for your
That's a
freedom.
prerequisite.
Absolutely, this is a service, beloved. You can pay for this.
Okay, very, very disturbing. Very disturbing indeed. So you were abused in essence. You suffered spiritual abuse because
Oh, yeah,
in settings like that, that's what it was.
but
It was
abuse was normal to me.
yeah.
I had abuse at home. I had abuse in school. I had abuse in church. So being it, I knew trauma, and I was used to being traumatized, and I kept. I was easier to traumatize because I was vulnerable.
Definitely. Did you begin to accept that as a way of life for you?
Being trauma. The problem was I was drawn to highly gifted, charismatic people because I was a highly gifted, charismatic people. The problem is, a lot of times, highly gifted, charismatic people are narcissistic, abusive, at least in the Bahamas, controlling and manipulative. And they will use people to get ahead.
Those are the traits that come with narcissism, though. So it seems to me that the people that you encountered were narcissists.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was a they were and you were attracted to them for some reason. Now, what I want to ask you is, have you figured out why you were attracted to those kinds of people?
In my studies, as well as sitting down with a great therapist, counselors, one of the things about me is that they kind of call people like us an empath, or
Hmm.
another term is highly sensitive people.
Hmm.
People who are highly sensitive, which means that my sensory perception is greater. So, like, um, literally, it's like this. After I go to work, like how some people can just normally function in spaces or whatever, I need to disconnect from seeing, hearing, and feeling things, just because it weighs on me far deeper. And
Definitely.
so, yeah, so one of the things, so people who are very, very empathic, naturally, they said that they tend to be, that it's almost a magnetic thing. They're more
I'm prone
easily,
to depression as well.
yeah, prone to depression, and I had issues with suicide,
Hmm.
um, um, and I was drawn to those kinds. I was drawn to those people because usually, and it's not an excuse that a lot of times those are the people who were moving. They were casting, but they were working miracles, and they were prophesying.
But in whose
Uh,
name? Put in whose
But
name?
but it was the only place at that point in time that you saw the supernatural. Me as a young guy, I've seen all of this stuff happen. People getting healed, all of this stuff. And here's the caveat: the presence of God really would be real. Now, God didn't show up because of them, obviously because of the people. But I was too young to know the difference,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so I would have so I sat in those spaces and felt and experienced um, all of that, and it damaged me for years. It damaged me for years. I've been wounded on so many different levels. And even I remember when I left one church, the leadership told me that they told me that I was committing spiritual adultery with another church, that I was in essence fornicating in my heart. Um, that blew me away. I have experienced extensive like public rebukes. Told me how was just how I remember one leader told me I need a good cut behind, and that I'm not just I was never good enough, never doing enough, never anointed enough,
Hmm.
and I was just always I'll continue the subject of a lot of criticism and being told I'm arrogant, proud, lofty minded, and everything. That my hands and my ambitions were impure, that I was carnal and fleshly, and these were the people that I submitted to. That because it was really a toxic relationship because they said they loved me, and these were the only people that hugged me. These were the people who I supported. All of this stuff, but it was a abusive relationship after abusive relationship, and
Having had that experience, how do you avoid falling back into those kinds of relationships?
when you've gone through it and you've healed, you
Hmm.
learn real quickly.
Okay.
Also, two things that I've learned. Number one, and I want your audience to, to consider this. There are two things that always work. Your body don't lie. Your body has an ability to recognize pain and trauma and people who are dangerous and how it feels. And I ignored myself, and
So
I didn't have
how did your body react? Tell us.
my body. I would feel a lot of anxiety. I could step into places and spaces, still can, and I could feel that something isn't right here. I'll never forget one time when I got rebuked before I went to actually my first public rebuke. The Holy Spirit said to me in the bathroom, "You're going to get rebuked tonight. I need you to
Mhm.
prepare yourself." I said, "Okay." And sure enough, she blasted me in front of the entire church for nothing, legitimately for nothing, because of something she apparently discerned. And then I would my body now it can tell. I could hear it in the sound of the voice. I also think it could be the gift of discerning of spirits. I can hear it in the sound of the voice.
Mhm.
I can get in the presence. I can see something in eye movements that lets me know this person isn't trustworthy. Be careful. And so
Mhm.
the way that I stay out of it is two things. The three things: I have a good counselor and therapist. I have safe people who I speak to and who are an extra layer of protection. And thirdly, I pay attention to my body. If it don't feel right, I'm not doing it. No.
Good.
Even if it is, I don't care. I'm not getting involved because my body has a way of your body can subconsciously tell you things that you don't have language for.
Sure. Sure. When did you when did you decide that, you know what, I need a therapist? Because, a lot of church folks still don't believe in going to therapy. So when did you
I
decide
didn't
that enough, I need a therapist?
I didn't know I needed a therapist. I didn't ask for a therapist. I couldn't afford a therapist.
Okay.
For years, I was preaching, even traveling, and still dealing with anxiety and a lot of suicidal ideations. Uh, for years, I didn't go into churches. To this day, I still wouldn't sign my name on any of these membership rosters now, because even the leaders I love and care about, that are good people, I don't have that measure of confidence in them. And it took, I think,
Put your
what happened.
confidence in them or what?
Mike, because I would look at I would look at the things that I saw happening in their churches. I didn't expect perfection, but I could tell. But I had enough conversation with leaders to know where their minds are at, to know
Mhm.
whether I could trust them with the care of my soul. And I found out that the people that I can trust to care with my soul were pastors, but they didn't lead local assemblies.
They were
They were
pastors,
great.
but what? I didn't hear the
They were
last part.
they were pastor gifts, but they didn't necessarily lead local assemblies. Um, there was a great woman of God. She's a jazz artist, and she wouldn't mind me calling her. There's only name I'll call her name is Simone Bowe. I remember the meeting so many times. I wanted career help, and she sat down and talked with me and took me under for years. Um,
Mhm.
and when it is that I finally decided to assist the church, it was the church that everybody called so carnal that you shouldn't have anything to do with.
Called Carnal.
Yeah, because NPCC, New Providence Community Church, the general gist and the thought was, and we laugh about it, that because NPCC was created as the church for people who were done with church, and it was literally
Okay.
designed to be the church that this is the last chance for a lot of people before they completely give up on church. And so I found I was serving them and helping them, and I found a great measure of safety and love with them. But the problem was that with me in therapy, well, because I was so gifted, doors started opening up for me to preach all over the place abroad. So nobody cares because your gift works, and
Exactly.
and so because my gift works, and no one really know how to take care of my soul, and thankfully some of the people I preach for became family for me. That's how I met the woman I consider my shepherd, my senior leader, my apostolic leader, because I preached for her, and she saw that and she had just a sincere love for me, and they were the ones who knew I needed help, who knew that knew about the times when I was hungry,
Mhm.
when I didn't have money to pay rent and different things like that, because I was here in the Bahamas traumatized and terrified when I wasn't working and dealing with so much stuff and wanted to kill myself. I wanted to die. And it was in a particularly dark season over, actually, interesting enough, not over ministry, it was a particularly dark season when it is that I was going through a personal crisis again about my own sexuality, that I reached out to somebody who had become a great friend of mine, and I told her what I was going through. She said, Alexia, you need to talk to my friend who's a therapist and who is a counselor. That's how it is that abroad, people who were really mental health specialists, who were
Mhm.
great individuals, who didn't have this Bahamian Caribbean bias, um, who I could talk to, and I didn't have to be afraid. Because the problem was, I would hear the stories of folk going to their pastors and leaders, and then they preach it from the pulpit, or they
Yeah.
use it against them, and they weaponize it. And so I didn't have money. I couldn't afford a therapist. I couldn't afford a counselor, and but I started talking to people who genuinely loved me, who just happened also to be in ministry, and which is the problem. I couldn't run from the gospel, from folk who really knew Jesus, and
Right.
they started to talk with me, started to help me to find peace with my own self and peace with God, and the insomnia ceased, the depth of suicidal ideations, the depression. Even I lost weight because I started to get healthy. I just knew I couldn't trust these preachers. I couldn't trust these leaders, and I was not going to put myself in the situation. They called me damaged and said I was abused, and they told me I was bitter. I wasn't bitter. I just knew I put myself in the care of some of you time and time again, and
That they abused you.
you screwed me over,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to let you do it anymore. And then I looked at their congregations time and time again, and I saw people who were broken and bitter, or who were gifted and prostituted and used like unpaid employees. And ain't nobody was going to do that to me. If I'm going to be a prostitute, I'm going to choose it.
Hmm.
You're not going to do it to me in the name of Jesus.
Right. So, are you at peace now?
Growing more and more.
Okay. That's good to
it,
hear.
I'm growing more and more. I, I'm doing the work to heal continually and to reconcile and work through
Yeah.
um, more than a decade of trauma and hardship on so many different levels.
Because
So I'm
of
doing the work of
ministry,
God.
because of ministry, or self-inflicted, or a combination.
It's I didn't inflict this stuff on myself. I
Uh-huh.
believe God. I believe preachers. I believe what I was taught, and I'm responsible for my healing. But
Hmm.
the problem, the reason I say I'm so antagonistic was because I so bought into what I was taught that was falsehood, that was heresy, that was doctrines of demons being perpetuated by people in the name of God that only facilitated bondage and created condemnation, fear, intimidation, and deeply damaged a young dude whose heart and his ambitions and whose motivations were right.
Hmm.
And so ultimately I'm responsible. If I didn't take responsibility, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah,
I
absolutely. So
but
you're on the road, and you're closer
mhm,
than you've ever been before, and you're feeling
yeah,
your
I have a
strength.
trauma. I presently have a trauma informed therapist.
Yeah,
I have a senior leader who is as apostolic, prophetic, and spiritually gifted and powerful as she is. She's also an exceptional counselor. As non-religious as possible. I have people that love me across the board. I mean, who really love me. Most of
great.
them abroad, not much here, but the people who really love me, who really love me, and not just in heart, but in behavior. There are some few here who have a great heart towards me, but I think I scared them, and then I make people nervous. I do,
But
but I
now
have
you
people
feel
who
like,
embrace
but
me.
now you feel like you're in a safe space where you're
Yeah,
loved, you feel protected, you feel
I
covered.
I'm in safe relationships. Physically, I don't always feel that way. I Every time I leave Nassau, I feel relieved, and I keep asking God, why in the world am I still here? But until
Right.
things transition there, I'm in good care. I have people who, at the drop of a hat,
Great.
will if I'm crying, they will. A lot of them on this side, they will run to my aid.
That's wonderful. Everybody needs to feel covered
Yeah.
and protected. So, shifting gears. So, we talked about church hurt, we talked about control, we heard
Hmm.
stories of manipulation. I want to switch now to talking about, because you do sit in the office of um, an apostle, prophet, and whatever else. So, let me read some of these comments.
I sit in a place of battle.
I got so much stuff going on in my head, as you already know. Okay, just all kinds of things. Okay, Travell says, I hear voices change in the spirit. Um, Monica says, somebody was gaslighting you. Wendell says, interesting conversation. Um, what else we have? Somebody said, let's see. I've literally walked in churches. This is Travail or Travell. I've
Hmm.
literally, or Travail. I've literally walked in churches and felt different climates in the same sanctuary. One side
Hmm.
was cool and the other sweet smell, while the other side was heavy and oppressive. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's kind of common. Um, it's very common in the churches. Yes, indeed. Its deliverance will come through separation. Okay, that's what the answer says. Okay, he, like all of us, are a work in progress, and that's the wonderful thing about God. You could still function, and he still graces you with your giftings and all that stuff. You can still function even in your brokenness, even though it's best that you seek healing.
Well,
But
let me address that.
uh-huh.
Let me address that. Whenever you get the topic of sex, sexuality, and whatnot amongst the saints, it's all kind of crazy stuff, ideas that they have. My healing was because I made peace with myself and I made peace with God. If I didn't, I would still be in them spaces for the folk to abuse me.
Sure.
It is aimed because it's in my deliverance is coming. No, my deliverance came because I found who it is that I am in Jesus Christ. and and folk, because if you want to get it, I won't get into it, but any theological issue you want to get with sexuality, sexual orientation, what I could do and I can win it. And I don't say it from a place of argument of arrogance. I say it from a place of truth, on a place of study.
Hmm.
But my awareness of the goodness and the kindness of God, not in spite of me, but because of who He is in me,
Sure.
created peace. And so, I, because I'm fully integrated in who it is that I am before God, not in people's opinion, not trying to explain anything to them. That made me. That is what makes me powerful now. That's what makes me unable to be intimidated, or what makes me to be able to stand, even no matter what is that people conclusions they have about me. Because I don't owe them opinion. I stand before one person. That's Him. And
Self awareness is the first step in the journey towards peace. Self
mhm,
awareness, because once you know who you are, once you know your own flaws, your weaknesses, I always tell people, and you and yourself, what does anybody else have to say about you? Like, really, it doesn't matter. It kind of just eliminates the naysayers. So
mhm,
let's move on. I want to shift right now and begin to talk about, as I mentioned, you being a part of fivefold,
mhm.
and I want to begin this segment. We running out of time. Lexio, look like me, and you're gonna have to talk some more.
Listen, keep
Oh
talking
Lord,
because they can. I promise you, they gonna stay on. Folk want this
no,
conversation.
I usually do an hour and a half every week.
Mhm.
So my audience is accustomed. We're here an hour and a half delving in, and I get in. I get in, and I haven't even scratched the surface of all the stuff that we've already talked about in the back.
Covered, yeah.
But I want to begin this because I think I want to continue this conversation with you. We're at a time where people are, as far as church, the church universal,
Mhm.
people are struggling. And it doesn't matter whether you're denominational, interdenominational, non denominational, charismatic, whatever you want to call yourself. People are struggling with church as usual.
Mhm.
An entire segment, even prior to COVID, has been done with church. Just
Mhm.
done. Like, and when I say church, organized church, these are people who love the Lord, not ashamed of the gospel, live lives that they believe are pleasing to the Lord as best as they can, but they're done with the organized church. For whatever reasons, they have
Mhm.
come to their conclusions. I want to talk about the importance of the operation of the fivefold ministry gifts in individual pockets, congregations, whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it. How important is that?
Okay, well, number one, you've done Ephesians 4. This is my hot topic. Ephesians 4 says that He gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers for the equipping of the saints. And it goes on to say that we all come into the fullness of the stature of Jesus Christ. The goal of the church, the end of the church is very simple: to become in the earth as He is in heaven. That is the end.
Mhm.
Fivefold ministry is given to facilitate that end. Now, whether it's doing that is a whole different story. Um, as an apostle, part of what I do is the word
First of
apostle
all,
comes from.
before you talk about what you do, for people
Mhm,
who are unfamiliar with fivefold, because I don't take anything for granted when I do shows, and
yeah,
of course, I'm a journalist. I like to give information. So
absolutely.
let's talk about, first of all, what is an apostle? What is,
Okay,
because I want to say maybe 10, 20 years ago, we didn't hear a lot of people walking around
calling themselves
calling
apostles.
themselves apostles. We heard
Hmm.
prophets and evangelists. And I always wondered about this in my sarcasm. How come I never hear anybody say, I'm teacher Elexio?
Well, first,
You know,
okay,
I
I'll take you
never,
through them. Let me take you
yeah,
through them
but
real
no,
quickly.
don't go there yet. But that's just me. I always like, nobody's just comes up and said, I'm teacher Miranda, or something like that. So let's go back to explaining, because I think I'm going to bring you back. Not I think
Okay.
I know, because we have to continue the conversation. But first of all, give us a definition of what is an apostle.
Okay. Well, the word apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos. It literally means sent or a sent one. What would happen is that during the Greco-Roman era, If when it is that Rome wanted to extend its territory or impact and influence regions and bring them under their dominion, they would send an apostle who would be considered a general, the head of a navy fleet. And in fact, the navy fleet, who was led by an apostle, would be called the apostolos. They would go into territories and regions that had not been colonized by the Roman government,
Okay,
and there would
slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down,
okay, sorry,
slow down,
they would go in.
slow down 1 minute.
Mhm.
But I want to ask you this. I want to ask you this. Why I told you to slow down. Wasn't the 12 of Jesus's disciples considered apostles?
They were considered apostles. They were the first, but they were not the only ones. They and I'm gonna get to
Right,
that right
right. I
now
know, because you started from the Greek something, and I just wanted to say, but they
because
were
because
apostles.
it's types and shadows. Because when Jesus used the term apostle, that they understood what he meant, but the kingdom that he was bringing was not physical; it was spiritual. And
Right.
the means and the method of dominion and transformation was the love, the power of God, and a renewed and a transformed mind. And so when he tells them to go and to disciple nations, it aligns with what he says that we should pray for his kingdom to come and his will to be done. Because the agenda of heaven has always been that what is occurring on earth be a reflection of what's happening in heaven. So the job of an apostle was always to go to people who had not been transformed or who needed to be liberated, who were called to be brought into the dominion of whoever had sent them. And when it is that they sent him, what they would do is actually establish an ecclesia, which is
Mm-hmm.
called the
Yes.
church, which
Right.
was to see to it that the intention of the kingdom of the king that had sent the apostle would see to it that that region would be transformed. That's why you had the Church of Rome, a Church of Ephesus, because the ecclesia understood that their agenda was to see to it that that society was transformed. So when it is that someone says that they're an apostle, several things it means. It means that number one, that they are saying that Jesus Christ has specifically endowed and empowered them and sent them to a people to see them transformed. It isn't. It is not to start churches. You
So,
can
what
start
people have you been sent to transform? Or this is different groupings of people, different places.
from me, because when the Bible speaks about the discipleship of nations, he sent apostles to nations. We think of nations just as geographical locations. No, it is different groupings of people.
Groupings of people, right?
And what happens is the apostolic mandate is a mandate that is given towards to see the wider body of Christ mature into the fullness of stature of Jesus Christ. So I go into a lot of different theological and social and spaces, preaching into the gospel, preaching in such a way that people that it creates unity and that it calls people to who it is that they're called to be. Because what happens is that in the church, a lot of times, if you don't think how I think, we discredit you and say you ain't saved unless you do and believe. That's how we get denominations a lot of times and sectarianism. So the mandate.
Okay. I got
Mhm.
like 10 minutes more. I got like
Okay.
10 minutes more for this. So this is just the introduction, y'all, because I want to really get into fivefold in a
Okay.
really it's, more implicit way. But for just in wrapping up this particular show tonight, when why are you, when I say you, meaning that apostle, why
Mhm.
are you necessary in the church today? Why?
I'm necessary in the church today because the body of Christ loves lies, and somebody has to confront the ideas that we hold on to that cause us from not seeing Jesus Christ as he truly is, that causes people who we don't think are saved or who we think that don't need to hear the gospel unless they become like us from understanding they are family. So yeah, I'm sent to LGBTQ people. I wholeheartedly believe it, and I've seen the fruit of that. I'm also sent to
Mhm.
preach the gospel and to raise up millennial fivefold gifts. That is a major aspect of what it is that I do. I have a mandate for women in the gospel, and so much of my preaching and teaching and even work behind the scenes has been to help to mature them, to equip them, and help them navigate misogynistic and toxic spaces. Um, I'm necessary because God needed somebody to he needed somebody from an insignificant space like Massive Point, North Angeles, to travel to Mexico to preach to people from other nations, to call them in and to see people as God had called them to be. So, for me as an apostle, my mandate obviously is just to see who Christ is, who He is in truth, and to tell the church that we hold on to a bunch of lies that are not Him, and to facilitate the church becoming more like Christ and less like the Bible, unless until Scripture bows its knees to Jesus and understood that outside of a Christocentric lens, we will not understand what Scripture is all about and who Christ is. My call is to see those that are willing to receive me become Him, to become Him, to become sons of God, because all of the earth is crying out for that manifestation. So that's what I do, just across the board, 24/7, day in and day out, to all who are willing to receive me. To those who don't receive me, I'm not an apostle, but I have seen enough fruit. I have seen enough churches walk through. I've seen enough people walk through uh, splits, church splits. I've helped enough people walk through private trauma. I've helped enough people understand their identity in Christ, and not just local assembly. I'm talking leaders. I've seen enough of what God has done that says to me that the grace that I claim to operate in is not a game, is not something that I determined in and of my own self. And it definitely wasn't because I'm looking for a pulpit or a platform. Because the things I've said, preached, and teach is enough to get me barred for life. But yet God still is out.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely would be. But well, on that note, this has been another edition of Swerve with me. This is a show weekly where we hang out on Sunday nights and we have adult conversations for mature audiences
Grown folk
only.
talk.
Real talk. You can see. I told y'all. I mean what I say. But this is that space because we have an assignment and our mandate is to create a platform where people can come to show their scars and to speak their truth. And the thing about speaking their truth is you don't have to agree with their truth. You don't have to like their truth, but in fact, it is their truth. And that's why we hang out here each night. So, Alexio, thank you for this first uh, part
Thank
one of
you.
whatever this is going to become. So let's
Thank you
just
so
any
much.
little parting words before we slip off.
Absolutely. I want all of you who are not following Miss Innes, please send a friend request, send follow, follow, click the follow notification, whatever. Please inbox her. Let her know that you enjoyed this. If you disagreed, whatever, let her know. Give her the feedback, but tell her thank you, especially those who are my friends. Let her know that you appreciated me being here. Let's show a lot of love because I'm grateful for the opportunity, grateful for her courage. Most folk, most folk in the Bahamas don't anyone hear publicly what I got to say, but nothing. And definitely show her your love and your appreciation. And thank you again so much. And this has been good.
Yeah. And it's going to get even better as we move along. So, thank you all for hanging with me tonight, for swerving with me. For those of you who don't know me, I am Miranda Innes. I am a life transformation strategist. I help people to navigate through life if you feel stuck, whether it's on the job, in your personal life, in your career, whether it's in ministry. I am that person that have literally helped, at this point, hundreds of people get unstuck and get on to create the life that they want and deserve. That's what I do. 6 steps, and I walk you through that process. So that is who I am. And I enjoy doing this. So, Alexio, thank you. We'll talk and see when we can continue this conversation. But thanks to my sisters for hanging out with me. I see Esther. Esther says, I don't think the body of Christ.
We paused.
The truth. That some people would rather believe a lie
Hmm.
rather than the truth. Joba says, I appreciate the show. Can't wait until next week. Okay, you see all the love. Monica says she loves you.
I do
Wendell
love them.
says, great show. Natasha
And I see
says that
that's your sister Patrice there.
Patrice Edwards, yeah, Tracy was out there saying some stuff
Tell Tracy I
somewhere.
love her.
Uh,
I love her.
hey, Farida, thanks for hanging in. So thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you again next week. Same time, same place for another edition of Swerve with me. Good night, everybody.